with the task. But okay, they have looked at the picture, they have listened to the song, maybe they want to know just a few things about Sting. So ask them to select 4 out of the 10 questions rather than all the 10 questions. And play the material once, twice, no more than that, because otherwise it becomes very tedious. And then ask, instead of saying, okay, what's the answer to number 1? What's the answer to number 2? You may ask, okay, Alberto, what have you learned about Sting? And then, just by asking this very simple question, you are sort of triggering the affective dimension. This is what I learned. This is not what I got for the answers. So you see, you may be triggering motivation, you may be triggering a need to listen and a need to participate in class. A very simple question. What have you learned? Rather than, Alberto, give me the answer to question number 1. All right, so pre-while. And now let's have a look at what we can give students as a post-listening activity rather than the fill-in-the-gap sentence-based, level. Okay, post-listening. And this is the key point here. In the while listening, you have to work with the affective dimensions, but in the post-listening, you have to work with the integration of the skills. And this is what I suggest, okay, for possible activities. Rather than activities, I would use the word task because they are more meaningful than just activities. So you can ask students to get together in groups of 3 or 4 and complete the chart. And I'm going to show you sort of an example of the chart. So remember that each student answered any 4 questions that they wanted to answer, any 4 pieces of information that they wanted to learn. But now, by grouping them in groups, by getting them in groups, they can be given a task. In this case, the task is, okay, complete the chart. But it will not be just sort of copying things from one piece of paper to the other, but it will actually be like putting all the resources together. Is what Alberto may contribute, is what Cecilia might contribute, is what Juan Carlos may contribute, because everyone answered different questions probably. And now they are pulling all that information together. And what are they doing? They are using English, they are speaking. Probably with pronunciation problems, but still they are using the language. That's the first integration. From listening, now they are speaking. And because they have to complete a chart, they are writing. And they are writing perhaps sentences, perhaps phrases, but they are not just writing one word in a gap. You can give half the class this chart, and you can give the other half of the class this other chart, a different one, but with the same input. They will have to use the same material, and the procedure is the same in groups, but instead of writing down what happened in those years, then they have to write what happens, or what Sting's occupation was before and what his occupation is now. So again, from listening onwards to speaking and writing. Those are tasks 1, option 1 and 2. And then we can have task 2. You may play the CD again, but this time the purpose is just to check any missing information, is to double check information that they have already put together. So they double check, they complete whatever is missing, and then you may give them another task, which is task 3 in this sequence. You can ask them to write a biography. They have the information in the chart, they have the information in the answers to the questions that they originally wrote, and they can come up with a paragraph. You will have to perhaps give them some extra scaffolding, some extra support in terms of how to organize the information. So probably you will have to tell them that in paragraph 1 they should include personal and family information. Paragraph 2, something about his first job. Paragraph 3, something about his early career as a singer. And paragraph 4, what his life is like now. And then each group, if you have 10 different groups, you will have 10 different versions, because they will be using the charts. And again, you'll have 2 different charts. So it will be a lot more diverse. It will be a lot more different, rather than just sort of reading aloud the same text, because each group will come out with different text, the same information, but probably organized in a different way. And then finally, as a roundup, you can ask one member from each group to read their biographies to the rest of the class, so that they can check again and you can work on pronunciation if necessary. Then that's the hands-on. That's my proposal. That's my pedagogical procedure that I'm suggesting here. And finally, we just need to go over the last point, which is the summary. And basically, it's the comparison between the traditional procedure and the suggested procedure. In the traditional approach for pre-listening, we as teachers elicit information, and we elicit information through language. It can be very plain, it can be very dull sometimes. So what can you include? What else can you do? Well, you can have a more holistic approach to learning styles, visual information, music, things, okay, perhaps even moving students around depending on the material. And the affective dimension plays a key role. It's not answering 10 questions, it's answering the questions that I'm interested in. For why listening, in the example that I showed you, there was the incorporation of sub-skills, listening for gist and listening for specific information. The focus was on the product, was on the result, was on the number of correct answers, and no instances for feedback, at least not in the way that I presented it. Perhaps you can introduce feedback and that would be fine. And again, the material is played to suit the needs of an entire class. And how many times do we ask a student to say, do you need to listen to it again? And everybody says yes, and it goes on and on and on. But then half of the class perhaps is already very tired of listening to it. The entire excerpt from beginning to end. So what is my suggestion? Focus on process rather than on product. And if you are wondering, how do I do that? Well, it's basically somehow what I've shown you. It's sort of divide the task into doable parts rather than sort of focusing on number of correct answers. The material, in this case the audio material, serves a particular or a different purpose every time it's played. The first time or the first 2 times, it was just to get the information, to get a specific information. And then when they heard it a 3rd time, it was way after the first or second exposure. And it was for a different purpose. It was just to double check any missing information rather than, guessing all the information at once. Through the while listening activity, I also introduced instances for the negotiation of meaning. And if you introduce negotiation of meaning, if you introduce a more holistic approach, then you will be, I think, successfully addressing the affective dimension of listening. Post-listening, we did the writing activity with a clear language focus, which is good. The only problem that it's very, very limited, as it only works at sentence level. And we know now that we need to work at discourse level.